What's up everyone? Welcome back to my channel. I'm JenWoodhouse.com and I am so excited to finally cross this project off my list. I am one step closer to completing my home office makeover. I share the progress so far on my blog, which is linked below, so you can check that out if you want to see more of this beautiful space. Today, I'm going to take you along as I build these pretty filing cabinets. I really needed some filing cabinets for my office, but I didn't want them to look like filing cabinets, you know? I wanted it to look like a beautiful piece of built-in furniture. So that's what I designed, and I will show you how easy it was to build. As always, I've drawn up complete step-by-step plans if you want to build this for yourself. Now, I write my plans like a recipe, so if you can follow a recipe, you can build this cabinet. This project is absolutely beginner-friendly. We're not going to use advanced woodworking joinery or fancy tools or anything like that. We're going to build this with some plywood and just a few basic power tools. But if you're further along in your woodworking journey and you're looking for a bit of a challenge, I'll show you a few ways to level up this project with dados and rabbets. Are you ready? Let's do it. I had some leftover plywood from my workshop build, so I'm going to use 3/4 inch birch for this. You can also use MDF if you plan on painting your project. Just be sure to use a primer because MDF will suck up multiple coats of paint like crazy. First, I cut the side panels to size. You can use a table saw or a circular saw for this. I used a circular saw with a straight edge guide because I didn't feel like hoisting an entire sheet of plywood onto my table saw. I also changed out my blade to a plywood blade. This will result in a cleaner, more precise cut and will minimize the risk of tear out. I also like to use a foam insulation board as a cutting mat. It supports the entire sheet of plywood while protecting whatever's underneath. I can use this foam board over and over, and it's cheap, easy to store, and easy to manage. Okay, so once the sides are cut, we'll need to notch out the bottom for the toe kick, which will accommodate the baseboard. I used a jigsaw for this. Now our baseboards are 5.5 inches tall, so that's how tall I made the notch. But if you have smaller or larger baseboards, just be sure to cut the notch accordingly. And here's a tip. To ensure that both parts are as identical as you can make them, clamp them together and then cut them as one. This way you'll only have to make 2 cuts instead of 4. And they're more likely to be the same because there's less room for error. All of the dimensions and the list of materials will be in the plans, as well as a recommended cut layout for the plywood. I kept a few things in mind when I was laying out these cuts. I thought about how to make the best use of the material so that there's very little waste, and I also thought about how to make the most efficient cuts. Now, since I painted this, the grain pattern didn't matter at all. But if you were to stain this piece, it's a good idea to pay attention to the way that the grain is running. You don't want the grains kind of going in all different directions if you can help it. And if you follow my cut layout, that shouldn't be a problem because I thought of that too when I was writing the plans. I really want to set you up for success as much as I possibly can so that you'll build something and then realize how easy it is. It's pretty empowering. All right, so we've got our 2 panels cut and notched. Next, I cut out the toe kick parts as well as the middle support board. I used pocket screws and glue to put it all together, but if you don't have a pocket hole jig, you can just pre-drill pilot holes and use regular wood screws. I pretty much always use glue on the joints. I think of it as cheap insurance. But wood glue is slippery and it can be frustrating when the parts slide around as you're trying to assemble them. So what I like to do sometimes is that I use nails as temporary clamps. You can use a brad nailer or a pin nailer. It just makes things a little easier if you're building alone, which I usually am. But today I have my husband helping me in the shop. Okay, moving on. Next I added the bottom. I attached this piece with just glue and nails, and then I added the top supports with glue and pocket screws. Okay, let's move on to the face frame. Now, for this part, I used solid wood 1x2 pine boards. You just don't really want to use plywood here because you can see all of the layers on the edges. I cut the 1x2s to length and then attached the face frame with brad nails and wood glue. Now, some elitists say that carpenters use nails while craftsmen use joinery. Well, we're DIYers and we're going to do what we want. Okay, it's drawer building time. I hear from a lot of folks that building and installing drawers can be a little intimidating, but as long as you take your time and you check to make sure that you're building square, you shouldn't have too much of an issue because you're basically just building a box. Now, there are a lot of different ways to build drawers, but here's how I do it most of the time. You always want to build the drawer box for the space that it's going into. Measure the opening and then build the box accordingly. Standard drawer slides typically require a 1/2 inch clearance on each side, so that means you're going to build the drawer box 1 inch narrower. First, I cut the drawer parts from the plywood and then I labeled them so I can stay organized. Next, I drilled 3/4 inch pocket holes into the front and back drawer parts. You always want to make sure that the fronts and the backs are inside the sides rather than the other way around. If the front and back pieces are outside of the sides like this, when you push and pull the drawer in and out, over time, this joint will weaken. But with the front and backs placed inside the sides, the screws are going in this direction, which will be stronger than if the screws were going in that direction. Does that make sense? I hope that made sense. Then I just constructed the box with 1 1/4 inch pocket screws and wood glue. So here's what I mean when I say check for square. Take your tape measure and measure the corners on the diagonal. These measurements should match. If they don't, then take the longer measurement and squeeze the corners together and adjust them until the two measurements are the same. Then you can clamp, screw, and let the glue dry. Now that all 4 sides are constructed, it's time to add the bottom. I usually do a floating bottom where the plywood slides into a groove that I've routed, but because I'll be hanging folders in these drawers, they won't even touch the bottom, so I just attached it with wood glue and staples. Now, I like using staples here instead of brad nails because the staples have a little more holding power. Okay, so here's how I install the slides. I usually spend a little more money to get the better, heftier slides because the cheap ones can really be frustrating to work with. It is so worth it to me to spend the extra money and save myself a lot of headache. Now these are the 18-inch full extension metal drawer slides. You're going to keep the 2 parts of the slide together, then clamp it to the cabinet and screw it on. You can do this for the other side as well. Then slide the drawer box in place. Nothing is attached at this point. Then pull the drawer out a little along with a part of the slide and then drive the front screw in. Move to the other side and do the same thing and then pull the drawer out a little more, screw the middle screws in, and then finally pull the drawer out completely along with the slide and drive the last screws in. All right, so check this out. These cabinets will have hanging files in them, and I searched for a hanging file folder frame, say that 10 times fast, and they were running at least 15 bucks a piece, so I racked my brain to try and figure out a cheaper alternative. Now, I found these 36-inch long square dowels for 98 cents a piece, and I thought they would totally work. I attached them with some scrap boards, which I then attached to the inside of the drawers, and now we have rails for hanging folders to slide on. And I saved myself over 50 bucks. What? Isn't DIY great? If you want to level up, cut rabbets into these dividers for hanging folders to slide on. And then you could cut dados in the drawer box so you could slide the dividers in without having to screw them down. This way, you've got some flexibility. You can slide it here for letter size folders and then here for legal size. Pretty nifty, right? So excited. Okay, next I attached the drawer face. I slid the drawer in, positioned the face where I wanted it, and then clamped it in place. I used my friend Brad's card trick to achieve the same spacing around the drawer face. Then I drove screws in from the inside of the box to attach the face. Finally, I pre-drilled holes for the pulls and screwed them on. I don't know why drawer pulls don't usually have templates with them, so I just took a scrap piece of wood and made a template for myself, so then I didn't have to measure every time. Now, before installing the cabinet inside the room, I finished it. I rolled a coat of primer on it and then put 3 coats of this latex paint. This color is Sherwin-Williams Roycroft Bottle Green in a semi-gloss finish. Once the paint was dry, it's time to bring the cabinets into the room and install them. You want to screw the cabinet to the studs in the wall because if you open both drawers at the same time, you could tip it over. So you want to be safe, screw the cabinet to the studs in the wall and then use shims if your floors aren't perfectly flat. Now for the top, I decided to get all fancy and I picked up a beautiful slab of Carrara marble from my local stone supplier. And then we just attached the marble top with silicone. Isn't it gorgeous? Ugh, I love it so much. If you want to see sneak peeks of upcoming projects, follow me on Instagram and Facebook. And if you found this video helpful, give me a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button while you're at it. Let me know in the comments if you have any questions, and then head over to jenwoodhouse.com for more info on this project and more. Thanks so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.